This is Jerry Barrett talking again. Today's date is June 24th, 1986. I'm continuing an interview with Ray Minella in his office in New York City.
Mm-hmm. We
finished with 1983.
Right.
Pretty much yesterday.
Well, what happened next was we thought we had closure, and everybody agreed that we were moving forward in a concerted way to remake the corporate culture at Eastern Airlines. And the first thing that happened in 1984 was that the pilots reneged on their deal and refused to take the deal that had been negotiated to the membership. And so in January, they tried to recut the deal again, and did to some extent, in terms of work rules and assorted other things. I mean, you could talk to Al Gibson about what happened there. And then they took the deal to be voted on by the membership. Now, the thing that was interesting about all of this was that instead of moving quickly to a vote, all of the constituent unions dragged their feet. And once Eastern surfaced and that it was, let me see, the pilots dragged their feet. I'm trying to sort out the 84 from 85. Let me think. I believe the pilots' situation was an amendment to their existing contract, and it was only through the end of 84. And basically through 84, all of these contracts had to be redone. What am I saying? Things basically did okay in 84. And the company did not make money particularly. I mean, it had lost a ton of money in the first, out of the box, but it basically bumped along and made a profit barely before what the cost of the securities that we put out that gave to the employees. But the real issue which emerged as things went on in 1984 was that the unions were not doing what they said they would do, in that they were not meeting together to decide what we do to fix the company permanently, to do what was necessary from a financial point of view.
Okay. Which was really part of the understanding.
It was part of the understanding.
In late 83.
In fact, a conversation that I had that fateful night at the IM Union Hall with John Peter Paul was, John, we can't allow any more stock to go out the door. Right, he said. I understand that. We don't want any more stock. I said, and we cannot borrow money to meet operating losses. Right, I understand that. Said, we know that we've got to make improvements, and we will do what's necessary. And on that basis, we went forward. So that the deal in 83 was the wage investment plan plus the promise to do what was necessary to have the company be financially viable, and that meant making a profit. Well, as time went on, that became more and more problematic, particularly with the IAM. Charlie has opposition within the unions, particularly in Atlanta. And Charlie, in the fall of 84, in a very confrontational meeting with the base in Atlanta, went on record as saying that he would get all the wages back to the pre-wage investment plan levels. So he put himself in a box with the political opposition within his own union. so that if he didn't get even for a nanosecond, wages snapped back to 18.5% above what was being paid because of the wage investment plan deductions, that he would have failed, even though it was in direct contravention to his previous promise to do what was necessary from a financial point of view. So throughout the fall, it became increasingly obvious that they weren't interested in negotiating. Their position was, on December 31, the clock's going to run out, and we're going to go back to our previous wages, to the previous contractual level. The salary of record is what it's called. It became increasingly apparent that the company could not exist under that basis. Now, as I mentioned to you, the banks had to grant waivers, and Eastern had the foresight to ask the banks for an extension based on the fact that labor agreements would be in place by January 31st. So based on that, the banks gave an extension on the waivers until January 31st.
84 now?
85.
85, okay. So that took you through 84. Okay.
Right. And Borman announced a day or so before the beginning of the year that the company was going to continue to withhold keep this money that was being paid out at the salary of record minus 18.5%.
Not going to bounce back or
Not going
snap back.
to snap back,
Yes.
in the parlance of Miami.
Right.
And so the company was sued by the unions on this point. And we had to go through depositions. I had to. Throughout, there was a point in time in January where the unions refused to negotiate until Borman paid the wages back. And I'm saying it this way on purpose because Eastern Airlines, somewhere along the line, stopped being Eastern Airlines and became Frank Borman's airline. He treated it like it was his own property. And the unions thought of it as his airline. And it wasn't the company doing something. It was Borman doing something. It wasn't the president of Eastern doing something. It was Frank Borman doing something. It was very, very personalized, which was not helpful.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, because the animosity. Can we do it at 12:30? Is that all right? You come.
12:30 is fine. It's just that Coach and Sandy Rich canceled out, so we're just sitting there, talking to them now.
Will you get?
Okay.
So anyway, we negotiated through January, and although my own firm's position had originally been that I shouldn't negotiate at all with unions.
I'm sorry, you were making another point when we were interrupted, which was that
the airline became a personalized thing, and that it was, and part of it was that Frank had a very paternal attitude toward the employees. In essence, he looked at himself as being a guy who had a responsibility to the employees that was almost spiritual
mm-hmm.
in nature. And it wasn't so much his job to run the company as to lead the employees.
Okay.
And he obviously knew what was better for them than the union leaders. And so he was continually trying to reach through the union leadership to talk directly to the employee. And of course it drove the union leaders crazy. And it became, at important points in time, a test of will.
When was that? The last 3 years, would you say? Or is it long?
Particularly, it goes back. I think it goes back to when he unilaterally decided to hold out to keep VEP in place through the operation of the Railway Labor Act. That was the acorn from which the mighty oak of labor discord grew.
Okay. Okay.
Anyway, we negotiated with the unions.
January 85.
In January of '85, and at that point, Charlie, sometime around in January, Charlie Bryan put forth a plan which would pay the labor guys, pay the IAM. I'm sorry, I'm not being very articulate today. Would pay the IAM based on a percentage of revenues rather than an agreed upon salary amount. Now, it was dismissed out of hand by Eastern's management, but in it was the core of the settlement, if you thought about it, which is what I did. And that was that we want to be paid on the basis of the top line because we don't want to give up wages and have the company's management piss it away. Okay? And, you know, because of all the other stupid things that they do. I'm fine, thanks. That if I'm paid on the top line, then I can basically get around the fact that I've got incompetent management. Rather than, so what Borman was suggesting was to give them pay them on a profit-sharing basis. They said, we don't trust this management to deliver profits. We want to be paid on the basis of the top line. And that insight to me was what was the thing that got us a settlement. Because once you recognize the dynamic that the union was seeking to insulate themselves, seeking to insulate itself from poor management decisions, then you could think of another way that they could insulate themselves from poor management decisions. And what that was the 1985 wage productivity plan. I think that's what it was called. The basis of it was, you know, we, the IAM, know how to do our job better than anybody, and there's lots of ways the company's wasting money. So what we will do is we will figure out a way to do our job better. And in terms, if we save money by doing our job better, either through doing it with fewer people and we don't replace attrition, or we figure out ways to do it faster, or whatever efficiencies we can come up with, then we will get credit for that efficiency. And we will be able to raise our wages by the amount of money that we save. So the bottom line isn't changed from the projection. Okay, but if we figure out a way to save money in work related to the way we do our jobs, either through work rules or whatever, then we can reflect that in an increase in our hourly rate. So that it's a zero-sum game in terms of the company. Company doesn't care, okay, because you're held to your projection, and okay, but it's a way to get, you know, boffo salary increases if it's true that there is waste and inefficiency and stupidity in management.
Right.
Okay? That was my concept. And but couldn't get it sold. And January 31 came, and I think we were at the Marriott, or could have been the Hilton. I guess it was the Hilton. Shuttling back and forth. We had a double suite, and Frank tried to get the IAM to agree on a wage concession, and they wouldn't do it. They wouldn't do it. In fact, he laid a profit-sharing plan on the table subsequently, which wasn't so much profit-sharing as, delivered all of the profit that the company made. The company was projected to make $90 million. And Borman put a plan on the table, which the union rejected, which would pay them everything in excess of $90 million. It was the most extraordinarily stupid proposal that one can possibly imagine, in my judgment. And I know that, I would hope we'll have a chance to tone down a little bit of this, but
Mhm.
that wasn't what they were asking for. It wasn't what they were trying to address.
Mhm.
They weren't trying to address that we don't want the company to make any more than $90 million. What they were trying to address is we want to be insulated from poor management decisions.
Yes.
Okay?
Mhm.
And anyway, when Borman begged Charlie, in fact, he said to him as the clock was striking 12, "Charlie, I'm begging you." And Brian wouldn't give in.
Raymond, John Barrett.
While we were off the record, you made some comments about Frank Borman. Wonder if
Yeah.
you'd elaborate on those a little bit.
I think that part of what happened at Eastern is you can't really understand Eastern without at least appreciating in some way or other the man who was the central figure in the company for 10 years, and that's Frank Borman. Frank is a man of tremendous personal courage. And he's also a man who believes strongly in his own instincts. As I said before, you never met a test pilot that ever made a mistake. And in a certain sense, that's literally true. You certainly never met a test pilot that made a serious mistake.
Yes.
And Frank, in his personal courage, which was demonstrated over and over and over again,
In the management of Eastern, you mean?
well, in his life,
Okay.
in his life, was someone who was willing to bet everything on his judgment. I mean, I remember once we had a talk, and I asked him what I was sure that everyone in the world had asked him, which was, were you afraid when you were sitting on top of the rocket and they were about to send you to the moon? And he said no. And the reason was that he had, when he was selected for NASA, he had dealt at that time with the possibility of dying, of being killed. And that's when he dealt with it. And from that moment on, that was not a part of what he thought about, because he dealt with it then, so that he wasn't afraid when he was on top of the rocket. Now, here's a man who was risking his life, which, after all, is all any of us really ever have, that we know for sure about.
Mhm.
We all hope on the infinite, but we know the present. That he was willing to bet his life that everything would go okay. It's a short step for someone like that who is willing to bet his life to bet a company on his judgment
Mhm.
and his ability to make the right decision at the crucial moment. And that is what he did consistently. Frank had trouble listening to advisors. And that's why Bill Ussery, in the labor relations context, was so crucial. Because Ussery was a man of tremendous personal stature outside of Eastern Airlines, who had his own credibility personally, who was an expert in his own field. And he was a man that Frank would listen to. He wouldn't always do what Ussery said, but he would do what Ussery said enough that it made sense for Bill to continue to try.
Mhm.
Okay? But to stay on the Apollo 8 dynamic for a moment, Susan Borman told me once that she had been out to dinner with Frank and Charlie, Brian, and I think Brian's wife. I think he was married at that time. And all evening long, Charlie went on about Apollo ate this and Apollo ate that for a couple hours. Finally, Susan Borman said, Charlie, can we stop it with Apollo 8? I mean, that was 10 years ago, 12 years ago, whatever it was. She said, Apollo 8 was 1 in a million. And he said to her, no, every man has to have his Apollo 8, and I'm going to get mine.
Oh, my.
I have come to believe that Charlie Bryan's Apollo 8, in his own mind, was beating the man who had Apollo 8.
Boy, that's interesting. That is interesting.
It all makes, I mean, it's of a whole cloth.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I think that it tremendously influenced the dynamic, the fateful night Eastern was sold. But that's getting ahead of our story.
Yes. Yes, okay.
So anyway, to get back to February of '85, we had a situation where the IAM was unwilling to adopt a plan that would implicitly trust management to do its job correctly. And so that's why we came up with this productivity program. Now the IAM had shown over the years a tremendous capacity for self-delusion when it came to what the benefits of working together and whistling a happy tune and getting rid of this gloom and doom, which of course is Charlie's buzzwords for Borman telling people that we're not making money so we have to cut wages, of how that would affect the bottom line. And so they were always wildly enthusiastic about their ability, with an absence of labor strife, to deliver big bucks in terms of savings. And what this program of counting dollar for dollar, again the phrase dollar for dollar, their productivity increases against increases in furtherance of wage increases, was to play upon their own rhetoric. If you see what I mean.
Mm-hmm.
If they're saying, look, all we have to do is stop fighting and start cooperating and we can save you $100 million, what I did is I turned it around and I said, we believe you. Believe yourself. Go do it. Okay, if I do say so myself, I was pleased with it.
Mm-hmm. Right.
That aspect. It turned out not to be workable at all, but I mean, it got us peace for a while.
Right.
So anyway, I when the night that of the end of January, we had to get a agreement, or the company would be in default with principal loan agreements. And we negotiated all night long. John Peter Paul was there. Brian Freeman was there. I thought Freeman's performance was particularly disgusting, but in any case, Frank begged the IAM to agree to a wage cut, and they refused. So the company went into default. I came back to New York. I was sure that that this thing was in deadlock, and that they would quickly file Chapter 11, because given all of the publicity about all the strife and everything, traffic was just disappearing. And what Eastern companies don't fail, Jerry, because they don't make money. They fail because they run out of cash. And when Eastern's cash position got dangerously low, they would be forced to file Chapter 11. And I knew from sources in the company that the cash position was running dangerously low. Well, I came back up to New York, and that's when I heard about this proposal, which I mentioned to you that Frank made, to give the employees all of the upside over 90 million of the projection, which was a 2% profitability target.
Which, from your point of view, is really a desperation kind of move.
Oh, it was not only a desperation move, it was a stupid move. You know, what's the phrase we learned in school? You know, hate the sin but love the sinner. Okay, smart people can do stupid things. It was stupid to do that.
Yeah, okay.
Okay? And the reason that it was stupid is that it did not address what the overriding concern of the main protagonist here was, which is to shield the IAM from the interaction of management on on the IAM's welfare. Now, forget for a moment that it's also stupid to think that management has no.
Ms. Whelan Jansen.
Okay, we're back on.
Okay, I haven't forgotten that management has something to do with generation of revenue, but it was based on a revenue thing that Charlie started from, so that was sort of embedded in his assumptions. Anyway, when I read that, I called Ussery and Johnson on that Wednesday, because they'd been back several days, and I told Ussery that he was turning, he's turning the corporation into a commune. I mean, what is this nonsense that the employees get everything above 90 million? I mean, who the hell, what's the corporation for? I mean, it has to work. A corporation is an organism. And an organism needs a number of things to live, right? I mean, and you take any one of those essential elements away, the organism dies. In order to run a corporation, you have to have capital, and you have to have labor, and you have to have management. If you have management but no capital, you have no company.
Mm-hmm.
If you have labor but no capital, you have no company. If you have labor and capital, you have no company because you need management. You need all three. And there has to be something in it for everybody in order for all to agree to play. Okay? And what this formulation did of giving all of the upside to the unions, to the employees, was to really make it very clear that there was an overriding concern at Eastern Airlines, and that was the welfare of the employees, and less of a sensitivity to the needs of other constituents. But again, I mean, I think you characterized it as a desperation move. I think it was. And when people are desperate, they do things but which they hope will work, which in less desperate circumstances they wouldn't do. And I don't mean to be hard on people. It's always easy to look back and shake your finger and go tisk, tisk, tisk.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? But, either that was a brilliant move because it worked, or it was a stupid move because it didn't. But you only make the value judgment after the fact. Okay, but anyway, I didn't think that would work
Right.
because it didn't respond to the concerns of the other side. So I told the fellow that I was working for at the time, Peter Brinkerhoff, that I wanted to go back one more time because I was sure that within the next 48 hours the fate of the corporation would be decided. That at the rate that I sensed that they were losing cash, I didn't think that they could hold off filing Chapter 11 very long. So I went back down on Thursday. And by the way, I had a meeting with Sam Belsberg for breakfast that morning. And I excused myself early in order to go back down to Eastern. And believe me, you can make a lot more money off Sam Belsberg than you can off Eastern Airlines. But in any case, down I went, and I wasn't invited. I wasn't asked to come. I just went. And I showed up, and it was after the board meeting. And I was in Jack Johnson's office, and Charlie Bryan walked in. and Jack was having dinner with Ussery and Brian that night. See what we could do. So I got myself invited to dinner. And I talked to Charlie all night long about this and that, and as I do believe that I have been able to talk to Charlie because I haven't lied to him. And he knows who I am. He knows what interests I represent. And I think at least if you go back to December of '83, I performed a useful service for him. So in any case, we talked, and it seemed to be productive for reasons which it's hard to define. He's got it like I'm talking to you. You smile, and you seem to understand. You talk to me, I smile, seem to understand. Well, it was like that with Charlie. He smiled, seemed to understand.
Right.
So anyway, he was expecting his superior, John Peter Paul, to come down. And Fred Bradley, who was the previous protagonist from, member from Citibank, also was down. So Fred and Charlie and I sat down with Jack and Bill Ussery. Fred Bradley came over, and we just started talking. This was after dinner. And then Jack and Bill had to go do something, I think it was with the flight attendants, and left Bradley and I there with Charlie. And after about 11 o'clock, John Peter Paul showed up. So John Peter Paul said, and I think this was interesting, said, look, here we are, the same three guys. We're all here together again, and it seems like it's time to get it done. And so I drank rum and cokes, as I remember, all night long. And finally, and so everybody, we had a full and frank exchange of views. All agreed that the world wasn't perfect, and mistakes had been made on both sides, but we had to find a way to deal with this. So finally, at 3 o'clock in the morning, I said to Peter Paul, look, John, none of us want this thing to collapse. So why don't we see what tenets we can agree upon as being things that the company has to have. And then let's see, once we can agree on those, let's see if we can meet tomorrow morning and hammer out a contract that will be consistent with those mutually agreed upon tenets. He said, great, let's do it. I said, okay, number one. Eastern Airlines, like any corporation, has different constituents. And a company has to work for all the constituents in order for it to survive. Right? Right. Yeah, we agree on that. Okay. Number two. In order for that to be the case, the company has to be profitable. Right? Right. Okay. So we have now agreed upon the fact that there are other constituents to serve besides labor, and that the company at a baseline, after all constituents are taken care of, has to be profitable. Okay, number three. You want the company's employees, let's forget every employee, the IEM, to be paid fairly for their labor. Right? Right. And what fairly means is what can reasonably be paid in light of all the other circumstances necessary for the company to make a profit. Right? Right. Okay, number four. And number four was the key. I said, John, number four, you want the IAM to have the ability to benefit directly from the improvements that they themselves can create to the profitability of the company or to the efficiency with which they do their jobs. It's to have so that the people that create those efficiencies are the ones that can benefit from them directly. Right? Right. Okay. Now we're talking, Peter Paul says. Okay, I said, okay, great. I think that these are the 4 tenets that we need. We ought to be able to negotiate a plan tomorrow to make them happen. I said, fine. So I said, look, I'll contact you in the morning. We'll have breakfast together, get us all together, and we'll hammer this out. Well, one of the problems of Eastern has been, and I'm sure that this has been a theme with some of the people you've talked to, has been that a lot of people made Eastern Airlines a little test tube for their own particular theories of how a company ought to be run, or how labor relations ought to be, or what a corporate culture ought to be changed into. There has been, and I'm thinking particularly of the Randy Barbers of the world, of implementing social theories and in really changing the nature of the class structure. There's really been a sort of a revolutionary, grab your red flag and mount the barricades kind of point of view on the part of some people who have basically come to the enterprise through either an academic route within sort of an agitprop kind of approach. There have been people, and I'm thinking of Brian Freeman,
right,
who has been, and I don't want to get sued by anybody, so I hope that take that into account.
I certainly do. Yes.
But so I suppose not using names is not useful. I probably shouldn't do it. Assume that they're not there.
Okay.
Okay. That's fair. You're Ussery's friend. I trust Ussery, so
Okay.
we're dealing with each other on that basis.
Yes, certainly.
Okay. That it basically looked at this as how they can make a buck, or how they can make themselves famous, or how they can take credit for this or that in order to benefit themselves, rather than how they can be useful in a situation where after they blow out of town, people still have to live with each other.
Yes.
Okay, that's been sad.
Mm-hmm.
And at one point or other, Eastern had Lazard Frere on the payroll, Brian Freeman on the payroll, Randy Barber on the payroll, the Locker Abrick people on the payroll, the one guy they should have on the payroll, Bill Ussery, and God knows how many others, all of whom had their own little point of view on the way that things ought to be done,
Right.
Implementing their own hidden agenda,
Right.
which may or may not have been to the ultimate benefit of those people that they were supposed to be representing. In any case, Brian Freeman was desperate to find a way to interpose himself into this situation. And I was quite concerned that if we could not progress on a straight line in the way that we were going, we wouldn't be able to get there in time, because this advisor or that advisor or this other advisor, having their own set of agendas, who wanted to prove that they themselves had the crucial value added, would get in there when I figured we maybe had 24 hours. And as a matter of fact, on that Friday morning when we met, I knew for a fact that the corporation intended to file Chapter 11 at 9 o'clock on Saturday morning.
Oh, boy. So you really were down at the wire.
Yeah. So I managed to get a room out of the Hilton Hotel. I had breakfast served there. I told only the participants where the room was. No one else knew where they were. So this advisor, that advisor would call Peter Paul's room, phone would ring. Charlie Bryan's room, phone would ring. Nobody knew where they were. And so we met, had breakfast. We rehashed the old tenets that I described.
The same 4 people again, no?
Yeah, it was me and Fred Bradley, Peter, Paul, Brian, and we added Ussery and Jack Johnson.
Okay.
And so we had breakfast and went through where we had been that night before, and then things started to get a little acrimonious. And so we withdrew, and Peter Paul grabbed me on the way out the door and said, "Look, you know, we were getting someplace last night. Why don't you come back?" And so Bradley and I went back, and we negotiated down this road that I've described. I mean, I knew exactly what we wanted to do. We just had to get there. And we handled with the numbers back and forth, and I had tried out different concepts, and Eastern applied them to the projections to see if that did what we needed to do. And Johnson's and Jose Smith's input was crucial. Jose Smith's a guy you ought to talk to if you haven't talked to him yet.
I talked to him briefly, but not we
He
didn't complete.
is terrific, wonderful guy.
Another hero in a way,
Yeah.
in another sense.
Oh yeah,
Yes.
absolutely.
Yes.
In fact, if I can, other than the friendship of the people that some friendships that I really treasure that came out of all of this, my fondest memory of this whole thing is when Jose Smith told me the night that we got the night after we got the wage investment plan agreed to. He said, "There's no way that your firm can pay you for what you've done." And that statement from Jose Smith to me was payment enough.
Yes. Yes.
Anyway,
Yes.
he's a great guy. You ought to talk to him. So we went back and forth, and finally, at 5:30 in the afternoon, John Peter Paul stuck out his hand, and it was agreed. We had a deal. And we went down to Ussery's room, and who should call but Brian Freeman, asked Zane that he was available to be helpful, thought he could be helpful, wanted to do whatever he could. The deal was done. And then Borman and the senior management came down and shook Ussery's hand and Bradley's hand. Bradley told him I negotiated, so I said, "Oh, okay, give me a shake my hand."
Did the when you say Peter Paul is the one who shook the hand in agreement, did the National push ahead a little bit?
Yeah, the
in
National, it's
leadership,
clear.
exercise some leadership
It's
there?
clear that in this case, Peter Paul really wanted to get an agreement and pounded on Charlie to do it. It's also true that Peter Paul had a wedding to attend the next day, out of town.
Those kind of personal things frequently help to
And he really
move issues along.
He really wanted to do it that night. I don't think he knew that if we didn't do it that day, that the company would file Chapter. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe he did. But that was the second. That was the second act.
Can you talk just a little bit about the ingredients of the agreement, as you recall them?
I wrote it all down on one piece of yellow paper. And there was one mistake that we made that day, and that we didn't get them to sign that paper. They shook out their hand, they said, "We agree, a deal's a deal." And then as time went on, Charlie came back and back and back with one thing after another. And it took months to get a final agreement worked out. I mean, I would characterize it as being, like the time when, back in the old days, Moses came down from Sinai, and the clouds parted, and there was Moses with his tablets, and the Israelites looked up, and there was thousands upon thousands of Moseses behind him, all dressed exactly the same way, carrying their own tablets. So one of the Israelite priests stepped forward and said, Moses, I don't understand." Said, "I thought there were 10 commandments. What is all of this?" So Moses says, "Oh, there are only 10 commandments." He said, "These are the commandments. Those are the regulations." What we agreed to was the commandments, and what it took 2 months to get pinned down were the regulations. But while that happened, and you have to understand one thing about Charlie, and I think about labor leaders in general, particularly in this kind of environment, that they're very process-oriented. I mean, when a labor leader is negotiating a contract, I think that's a real natural high. And they enjoy the process. And what they're paid to do is get the best deal they can for their members. And so, Charlie's consistent negotiating strategy has always been to just refuse to budge. And if you think about how that interplayed on Frank Borman, Frank was a guy who basically took responsibility for everything. And the point of what a test pilot does, if you've read The Right Stuff by Tom Wolfe, is when something starts to go wrong, they keep thinking, what else to try? Finally, they'll find a way to bring the situation under control. That was exactly Frank Borman's mentality. If something didn't work, he'd try something else. If that didn't work, he'd try something else. It was always, what else? And if I'm a guy who refuses to budge, who refuses to negotiate, the longer I sit here, the more sure I am that he's coming closer and closer and closer to me. Because he's got to find a way to make it work.
That's right.
Okay? I mean, it was...
It's ideal for...
It was a consistently effective negotiating strategy. And in the end, it was too effective. Charlie didn't know when to stop. That was... If Charlie's had a fatal flaw in the way that the process was conducted, it was that. He didn't know when to say enough. He didn't know when to leave well enough, leave something on the table for somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
And Frank, I mean, one of my colleagues at Eastern once said about Frank Borman that if it was up to Frank, there would be no music because all 8 notes would be played at once. Bill, I'm sorry. The reason I say all these clever things is because all my friends say clever things to me. I just repeat them. Ussery, one of the things that Ussery has said, which I found consistently true, is that the right idea at the wrong time is the right solution at the wrong time is the wrong solution. That there's a time dimension to problem solving in the labor relations area, which does not exist necessarily in other areas of problem solving. Mm-hmm. 2 plus 2 will always equal 4, no matter what time of the day it is. Okay? $2 an hour will not necessarily be the right solution depending on where you are in the negotiations.
Yes.
Okay?
Yes.
And that I found that to be particularly useful as time has gone on. But in any case, Frank Borman had a very hard time coming to grips with that. And I think it was because of the mentality of his background, that you find a solution, and if that doesn't work, you try something else.
Yeah.
If that, you try something else. And it was very hard on Frank to do 2 things: to wait and to allow someone else to have control of the situation, to allow his people to do it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It was very hard for him. And if you take all of that dynamic and put it against what happened back in March of '83, when he said he was going to take a certain course and then veered off at the last minute, it meant that the credibility that management had to say, we are going to do this, was lost.
Mm-hmm.
It was lost completely. And the problem that everyone had to deal with was that of miscalculation. That because of the past, the actors wouldn't know it was a different play.
Yeah.
Okay, and it became clear to me as we went through the spring that the game had changed. That everybody that had been sort of in the spirit of, agreeing to do what was necessary in February because they were on death's door when the business got good and then it got great, a lot of people felt that they had left something on the table.
Mm-hmm.
And so the machinists, when they voted on their contract, turned it down. Charlie never even bothered to pump for it. He thought it was a fait accompli. But the guys in Atlanta particularly crossed him up. And I think effectively they said, we are not going to go along with whatever you say.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of other people in Miami base didn't even bother to vote. Okay, so it was turned down. The pilots, this was, I guess, in early April. The pilots looked at the month of March, which was the best year in Eastern's history in terms of profitability. They made more money in that month than they had made in any year in their history, okay, which was over 50 years. And they said to themselves, I think, there's more, we settled for too cheap.
Yeah.
Okay, and since there was linkage among all three contracts, all three unions had to agree to them. Okay, except for the IM, I believe. The IM's contract was not dependent on anybody else, and that's because they're the only organization that had professional labor leadership. All the other guys were amateurs, up from the ranks. Okay, the flight attendants and the pilots.
Mm.
Even though we've already established that the pilots are the smartest people in the world, right?
Yes. Yes.
So when Charlie's contract was not endorsed, the pilots took that as an excuse to say our ratification, which they had ratified by over 2-1, isn't valid. And so we no longer have a contract. And that was really the storm warning, I think, that there was no discipline or really integrity to the process because people didn't know where the limits were.
Mm-hmm.
On the labor side particularly. Solely, really. I think management really did understand the game. And I mean, the fact that they were able to carry on the way that they did under the enormous personal strain was always amazing to me. It was amazing.
Yeah, because now we're in the third or fourth year of almost
continuous
yes.
continuous strife. So anyway, while they were still fighting away with the pilots, things were still going great guns. And so,
Business-wise.
yeah, business-wise. And the company made something like $125 million in the first 6 months of the year. It was tremendous. And I have felt a sense of personal vindication as a result of it, as you can imagine.
Mm-hmm.
Because it had been my hope that although there was a lot of problems here, that if we could find a way to give people the time to work together, that they would find a solution and they would work together and make the thing work. That the real danger was just not enough time. And in the end, I think we gave them enough time. That didn't turn out to be the problem. The problem was really the pathological interaction that they had with each other, and with a lot of it being related to the personal animosity that existed between Borman and Brian. And I mean, Frank isn't perfect. Nobody alive today is. But he was, I think he consistently comported himself vis-a-vis the Machinists Union in an honorable way. Anyway, that brings us to summer. And things were great in May, and they were okay in June, and they got less good in July, and they got crummy in August, and they got terrible in September. And along the way, we did another common stock offering, which ended up being, I think, the money that enabled the company to survive in the end, through the, what it took to finally reach the catharsis, or go through the catharsis. But I became convinced in August or September that there was only one solution here, and that was to sell the company.
Oh, that early you were
Yeah.
thinking on that line, huh?
Yeah. Because I had shared a foxhole with Bill Essery and Jack Johnson for almost 2 years. It had been almost 2 years to it was almost 2 years to the day that we'd been involved with in this kind of a thing where bankruptcy and ruin and was a realistic possibility. And it was clear that everything that had happened for the previous 10 years had taught the unions that they never had to respect a deadline, they never had to fear a threat, that the corporation could never finally go through with the one thing that the unions had a right to fear, which was a Chapter 11 proceeding. And that in the end, if they held out, they'd get what they wanted. Everything that had happened in labor relations had taught them to count on that, which led me to believe that they wouldn't be able to figure out when the game was different.
Mm-hmm. They'd only played it that way.
They'd only played it that
and
way.
been rewarded for doing it that way.
So it seemed to me that there was one way to deal with it. And that was to do either one of two things. Either file Chapter 11 or sell the company. Now, Chapter 11 was an area that I viewed with a lot of distaste, because you really didn't know what would happen. Lorenzo managed to make it under a different law, and in a situation where you didn't have the kind of protracted, acrimonious civil war that had existed for years and years. And it was a much smaller operation. I mean, the pilots all stayed home, so he hired new pilots, and away they went.
Mm-hmm. You're talking about Continental now?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Right.
But I mean, what did he do? I mean, I'm not sure exactly what the numbers were, but I mean, maybe he hired 250 or 300 pilots. Eastern had 4,000. The size of the operation was daunting. And if you look at what has happened to companies that file bankruptcy, it is rare that the equity values of the shareholders are protected in the end. And particularly when you were looking at a situation like this, it was a lottery ticket, in my judgment. And what that left was sale. And it seemed to me that one of two things would happen. Either one, the company would be sold, in which case the shareholders would get out. Okay, they would be paid off, and you'd operate the company under a different management, and depending on who bought it, you could do different things. I mean, Lorenzo is the perfect choice in that regard for operating flexibility. Or alternatively, the unions would wake up and say, if he sells the company, the game is up. And that is a realistic alternative, and he will do that. Whereas maybe I don't think he'll chapter it. He will do it. And so maybe what I ought to do is reach an agreement, depending on the external discipline of the marketplace rather than the credibility of Eastern's management. The risk there was that events would develop a momentum of their own. And if you wanted to play the selling the company strategy in order to make a labor agreement, you had to be willing to sell the company.
Okay, okay.
Because if you really weren't willing to sell the company, you wouldn't be able to. And then you would be completely screwed, because you would have no alternative but chapter. Okay? Our firm believed that there was no way that Borman's competitors would allow Eastern to use them to lower his labor costs to compete more effectively against them. Okay?
Okay, yeah, yeah. They're reasonable business people,
Yeah.
and they would not allow that to happen, yeah.
So if you went off to sell the company, you had to be willing to do it. And of course, that was very difficult. It was very difficult for Eastern to make the decision to do that. And really what that leads us up to is the third act, which is the one you showed up here to talk about to begin with.
Yes, right, right.
And I'm supposed to, I've got a meeting at 2 o'clock. So how can we accommodate this last tranche? Are you going to be up here, you're leaving today?
Yes.
When are you going to be back in New York?
Well, I can come back tomorrow, if that makes any sense to you. Does it?
Yeah.
I can turn this off, I guess.